I'll try to say some words for Alex because I think Alex was sort of really responsible for a lot of things were like decisions or sort of routes I decided to make in my professional sort of life. But I will say it in Hebrew, I'm sorry. בגדול סתם, חשבתי כאילו איך לתאר כאילו את אלכס בגדול, ככה בכמה שיותר מהר. ונזכרתי באותם דקות שהיינו מסיימים פגישה, והיו איזה 2 דקות שהוא היה אומר, אני מלווה אתכם עכשיו לדלת. ובתוך ה2 דקות האלה, בתכלס קרה כל מה שיכל לקרות עם אלכס. זה היה מתחיל מה שלומך, מה שלום ההורים שלך, מה שלום אחותך, מה שלום הבעל של אחותך, מה שלום האחיינית שלך והאחיין שלך, והוא היה יודע הכל על כולם. ואז מתוך איזה פינה, איזה בן אדם רנדומלי שהחליף מנורה למעלה, הוא היה פתאום שואל אותו, אז מה שלומך ומה שלום אבא שלך ומה שלום אחותך ומה שלום זה, זאת אומרת, והוא היה יודע הכל, ושני הדברים האלה כאילו קוראים בערך בו זמנית. ותוך שנייה הוא היה רואה איזה משהו על הרצפה, איזה חתיכת זבל, הוא היה מיד מרים את זה, מחפש פח, זורק את זה בפח, בתוך הפח הוא היה מוצא איזשהו אובייקט, היה מוציא את האובייקט ואומר, וואו, זה האובייקט הכי מדהים שאפשר למצוא כאן, כאילו הדבר הזה צריך להיות באוסף. ובזמן שהוא מדבר על האוסף, הוא פתאום שולף ספר מהכיס, כמו איזה קוסם, ואומר, כן, זה מאוד מזכיר את הבן אדם הזה שהיה במקום הזה, ואתה חייב לראות את זה, ומתחיל לדפדף בספר, ואומר לך, אז מה דעתך על זה? ומה דעתך על זה? ומה דעתך על זה? ובתוך כל הסביבה הזאת, איכשהו חוזר לזה אז אולי תראה גם לאבא שלך את הדבר הזה, ואולי גם לחוזר, זאת אומרת, ואיכשהו כל הדברים האלה התנגסו ביחד לתוך איזה 2 דקות קסומות כאלה, שאתה מדבר על הדברים הכי אישיים, הדברים הכי פרטיים, העיצוב נכנס באמצע, ואין שום הבדל בין מה שקורה בין החיים המקצועיים שלך, למה שקורה לך בחיים, למה שקורה מסביבך, ובאיזשהו מקום נראה לי שה2 דקות האלה זה איזשהו מיצוי של איך שאני ראיתי אותו, לפחות, של להצליח לעשות משהו כשאתה רואה את הכל. וזהו, וחבל לי מאוד, כאילו שאלכס בתכלס, שזה כל כך כאילו גם תמך, נראה לי תמך בי כאילו, פשוט לא פה. זהו, אז עם זה אני אנסה לעבור לדברים הבאים. So basically, I'm coming from a graphic design background. I did some books, did a lot of books, I think. Some pieces from my final project where I sort of dealt with music and graphic design. Then I met Noah Schwartz and we opened a shared studio together, did books for artists, for designers, museums, exhibitions. This is a book we did with Alex for the collection. Design for Change with Alex. Some of the books you might know, but I think probably most of them no one actually heard about. So I think after 6 years, I sort of got into a crisis. So I think I had the usual sort of graphic design crisis, that everything looked the same, I'm doing the same thing, I'm working for customers, blah, 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 blah. What am I going to be when I'm going to grow old? I'm going to just have another studio and that's it, this is how my life's going to end. I was really sort of into this crisis. And of course, Alex, in a few minutes, just told me, forget about this thing, you just have to go see the world, basically. And he sort of really directed me to this amazing department in the RCA, Design Interactions, where I also met Noam. And I started I came there with a lot of frustration about the place I'm sort of working in. And I had this thing of kind of looking around and seeing, what's happening with books, that instead of, we used to burn books because they were not allowed, they were kind of making problems conceptually. And now we're sort of just using them as, decoration objects. This is things that you just see every day in London, sort of like high street shops. You get books inside magazines as a present. And I think one of the most ridiculous things I saw, I think a few years ago, was this writer that decided to write her own book within a bookstore window. So that's her sitting, talking on the phone, supposedly writing her new novel. The second thing I was really sort of realizing is that basically for the past 100 years, graphic designers were basically adapting themselves to the technology, and they never was actually thinking about what technology do we need, why, because we're doing, we're coming from graphic design, what does it mean, what do we need for this thing, or what do we need to develop for this thing. So basically this is sort of just an illustration of, how graphic design looked for me. And through my first year, I had this chance of doing sort of a design research with the Microsoft Research in Cambridge called The Future of Writing. And I'm not going to get into the project, but in the end of the project, basically, I came up with this notion that if I don't know how to answer those questions, like why do we actually write, why do we read, and those sort of supposedly were supposed to be my, the question that graphic designers or book designers supposed to have some answers about them. So if I don't know the answers, I should maybe kind of reconsider what I'm doing until I, have a bit of something about those things. And I found this really nice quote that says, from the guy who ran CERN in the beginning, who says that it doesn't matter how much R&D you're going to do on a candle, you're never going to go to electricity from there. So I think I took this approach and I said, enough books, I'm trying to move on in order to sort of find something interesting about it. And I think my last project, kind of related to book, I had a brief called Design Philanthropy, and I found this library in Lambeth, in London. They were having trouble because the council was sort of threatening them to close them because they were a really small library. They only had like few sort of new books just from recent years. And I thought about why not making a machine that will give those books history, that will actually make them old. So I came up with this book aging machine. This is some experiments I did before, kind of trying to, how to make paper old, how to treat those things. And I found up a nice system that I will show you in this. So basically that was the machine. There's like a UV light inside, which is like sunlight and humidity. And you just turn off the pages, and every hour basically equals to 4 days, or it was the opposite, I really don't remember. But that was the idea. So basically after 1 week you get a book that is probably 100 years old in his look. And for me that was a sort of a playful, critical thing about the place I'm coming from. And the nice thing, I mean, for me was when I showed this thing, it got published, basically published in Frame magazine in a context of other sort of designers making their own technology to produce products. And I think that was the first time I sort of felt comfortable or felt that I'm sort of finally moving on from the place that I was in. And then in my first year, basically, I got this brief to deal with something called synthetic biology. So synthetic biology is all about basically having an engineering approach to genetics, which means you have small components, you put them together in circuits, and you get something that works or doing something. And the idea is you have genes, you have different sort of promoters, you have a starting point, an end point, everything, you put them together, you create like this thing will create this protein, this thing will create this material. You design everything in a digital environment, and in the end you just order like bacteria's DNA, everything you decide you want to test. And one of the most, I think, recent famous sort of known project was this glowing trees Kickstarter project, which basically a guy used a shareware, like a free software, developed by an Israeli company called Genemart, to actually sell a new product, like a new sort of synthesized product with this glowing protein, to have trees around us that glows. And this thing, this sort of crowdsource, free DIY thing is like getting sort of really getting to be part of the synthetic biology sort of environment. And one really nice example was this nice kid here in 2009 was part of a MIT competition, really sort of established competition called iGEM. And he developed a DNA synthesizer from Lego, which is, I think is like really amazing achievement for a 11 years old kid. And when you look at sort of, the cultural, or sort of cultural interaction basically, or the way we sort of want, the world around us to be, you get those nice dogs, I think those from China, they just dye-hair them, so to make them look like a tiger, to make them look like a panda, but basically it's just a pure breed dog, which people would really like to see them as something else. And when scientists are starting to work on really bizarre projects like glowing cats and glowing monkeys, actually this is a few generations of glowing monkeys, so they actually pass the gene to the next generation, staying glow, like still keeping the glowing thing sort of trait within them. There's a nice experiment from the 50s with this Russian scientist called Dmitry Belayev. I'm probably not saying it right. But what he did was sort of trying to see how we got into dogs, basically, from wild animals. And he took those wild foxes, Siberian foxes, which were really angry and vicious. Every generation, he picked up just the nicest one and started breeding the nicest one and got a new generation of really cute foxes that you can hug and play with, and they're not going to bite you or not going to do anything else. And in a way, that's sort of making nature sort of just fulfilling a sort of a human, maybe a psychological sort of need that we have. So I took this idea of making kind of trying to get some psychological needs from nature, basically, through synthetic biology. And I thought this thing about sort of poetic genes. I mean, if there's a possibility of actually infusing stories, like stories that we tell every day, into animals. So apparently the process is actually feasible. And I decided to take just a few memories of my grandfather, which I didn't know, things from his childhood, his family, try to sort of look at the traits, if he was intolerant, if he was a pessimist and anxious. And apparently there are genes for each one, or this is what they say, or this is what they tell us. And what will happen if we're gonna put all those traits into a mouse, basically a transgenic mouse model. And then the only thing that I would really like to have is basically looking at my grandfather sort of operating, through his life. So I designed this sort of system, which looked like this. This cage just sort of goes through his childhood, through different sort of phases in his life, with a mouse model that has my grandfather genes. And the aesthetic, of course, was sort of coming from the period he was living in. And this is the end of his life. So what I did in my second year in my final project was actually taking this project, this really tiny project, into the real world and see what is actually happening around us. So I looked at what sort of genetic services are actually accessible to us as public, what we can actually, just put our credit card in and start working it out. So a year ago, I think almost 2 years ago, basically, Google 23andMe, which is just a gene sequencing service, started to be like a really like a big hit. Also around it, there was a lot of services that offered forensic tests. So basically you can get someone else's genes, send it to a lab and get it sequenced, get these genes mapped. And another thing I discovered that the transgenic mice were actually a service that was open to the public. They didn't pay attention to the idea that they were unethical and they have to kind of close it to science, to the lab. And you get those things, kind of mice that are tailored for your needs. So basically you can choose any genes you want and just put them in the mouse. So the second phase was, okay, so whose life do I actually, people would like to see? And the second thing would, how can I get these genes? And my answer was eBay. So apparently in eBay, there are like really huge celebrities, pre-owned items sort of culture going around. So you can get like t-shirts of Pamela Anderson with some sweat stains. You can get letters sent from like famous prisoners, like, I don't know, from Al Capone to the Craig brothers. And of course, you get hairs of all the celebrities you can ask for. And the three of those, apparently, were the most popular one. Three guys and a lady who died before their time. And apparently, and you know, how I see it is basically that we would really like to have them alive, kind of just looking at the end of their, you know, what would have happened if. So I bought the hairs of three of them. This is the hair of Elvis Presley I bought on eBay. It cost something around $25. You get this certificate from his barber with a sample, with a signature, that this is Elvis Presley's hair. And then I had to do a proof of concept. So I contacted those two scientists I was working in the summer with on one of the iGEM projects in Imperial College. From certain reason, I can't show their faces and tell their names. I'll get into it. And we did this proof of concept. We just took one of the scientists' hair. We tried to look up for a gene called ACTN3, which is the athlete gene. And of course, we found out that the scientist doesn't have the athlete genes, surprisingly. So what it means, basically, that if a mouse will have this gene, so a really important experiment. Yeah, so that's the thing. That's the sort of translation that you can get from different traits. So I got into the design project. So I have the mouse. I have Elvis's hair. I have the mouse that contain Elvis's genes. Now I have to create Elvis's life. How could we, you know, kind of take a look at Elvis's life? So I looked a lot in different biographies of Elvis. And from the other hand, I looked on some scientific models, behavioristic models of mice, and I got this amazing book, What Happened to My Mouse, which is the Bible of behavioristic science, apparently. So I think for a few weeks, I was going around with all those crazy experiments. Some deals with anxiety, some sort of deals with threatening mice, some really incredible and horrible situations that you can, you know, put a mouse into. And I tried to sort of pick up some of Elvis's parts, looking at, you know, what made him as a child, what did he actually went through. And I came up with those 6 models. His childhood, one that talks about his talent, one sort of talks about his self-image, how he gets bigger and bigger in time, kind of looking at himself. One was the Graceland, which every place which he got a lot of sort of positive reinforcement, a self-reflection period, and in the end, the escaping life. I don't have the video, but basically the there's a video illustrating all of those models, basically what happens in there. I mean, how do they treat him? What do we have to do? Sorry. And regarding the design, I thought of a system that would be sort of a modular system that you can actually tweak and change to, you know, what do you want to, the things that you would like to have or see Elvis sort of going through. So I experimented a lot with the materials from those cages, which was metal, and I came up with this really simple sort of modular system and started constructing the cages. I looked a bit of into Graceland, basically, to take some samples of how this thing should actually be. And this is the project. So those are over there on the frames, the real hairs. And there's the tower would basically go from his childhood to his death. Everything is sort of with small electronics, opens things, sounds, and different. Those were the mice I showed, sort of just to illustrate the idea of, you know, having one model and having another model and having another model and testing their lives. Some details. This is Graceland. And the end. So that was the project, but the most interesting part of the project, I think, was the things that happened after the project. So at the beginning I was really happy, everything was really nice. I got noticed by this kind of design-related, art design-related places. I was really, really happy. Everything was, I couldn't ask for more. And then I got this email from Wired magazine, which basically asked me to give them examples of those services that I was using. I didn't pay attention to this warning sign that I felt uncomfortable with, and then they published the project as if I actually went and did those mice. So there are actually mice with Elvis Presley's jeans. And when I first saw this thing, I was really, really afraid. I sort of went through. There were basically two guys I were trying to sort of consult with. The one approach told me, forget about it. It's like newspapers, everything. They just distorted all the facts. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep on going. The other one said everything might fall down in a second. And while I was sort of thinking, what should I do? This thing got really bizarre. So people, Elvis's fans, just newspapers. It was one of, I think, one of the 15, I don't remember, like a really huge hit on MSN. Scientific American, like all it was really sort of got out of hand. And at the same time, I think it was the same week or 2 weeks afterwards, Madonna suddenly came. There was this thing when Madonna appointed the DNA team to sterilize her dressing room after she used it. So suddenly everything came together and, oh, Madonna's doing it. I got Elvis, basically, yeah, that's it. And I was invited to this, that doesn't matter, go back, we'll go to the more interesting parts. I think the nicest email I got in this period of time was from a company that actually wanted me to sell them the clones, and it's to start producing them in the US, of course. So I'm fascinated by your experimental design as well as the overall goals of your experiment. So he treats me as a scientist. If you and your colleagues were at any point planning to sell those mice to the general public, other laboratories in the near future, if so, what would be the cost for said rodents? So that was, like, I think, a fantastic thing that sort of really showed how people really want those things. back to reality, I was basically, Imperial College was threatened by, by a lawsuit from the company, one of the companies that make those transgenic mice, because they thought they were actually made. So I think the 2 months after I graduated, I was only doing emails with the RCA PR to take off basically all the articles that we could, or change the details. So the Daily Mail, which is like a really sort of like a yellowish, yellow sort of a newspaper, just took it off because I think they are sort of threatened by lawsuits, you know, by the hour. A nice thing that I sort of discovered actually just a week ago, because the project is shown at the Science Gallery, so it's sort of reconstructing the whole thing again. There was a nice show, and this is sort of an example of how the general public or the yellowish thing treats this project.
Michael Moran for bringing this final story to my attention on Twitter. It's being reported in the Mirror online, but this would seem to be verified by like an official website. As part of a living art project, a British artist called Kobi Barhad has created a mouse with Elvis Presley's genes. That's genes with a G, not genes with a J, because they'd have to be very, very small genes.
Yeah. Well, they do shrink though. They do.
So Koby bought some of Elvis Presley's hair on eBay for about $22, extracted the DNA, sent that to a gene sequencing lab to identify different behavioural traits in the DNA, like sociability or obesity or addiction, certain things that Elvis Presley was kind of known for. Using this information, mice clones with parallel identity traits, character traits, were then produced. Now then, these Elvis mice, as part of this art project, which is called All That I Am, these mice were housed in different scientific mouse model environments. So each environment represented a different circumstance.
So one in a little Graceland.
In Elvis's, well,
one in a little Sun Studios.
More behaviourally.
I see.
So there's one with like a curved mirror, which is supposed to represent self-importance and fame. There's another one with a sloping treadmill, which is supposed to represent the singer's decline.
This person has managed to extract key signifiers of Elvis Presley's DNA so easily just by buying a bit of his hair off eBay. This sounds a little bit. So we cloned Elvis Presley.
I just report the news. It's a full art project. There's you can see that it's like a huge construction. This tower, and each part of the tower, a different mouse with Elvis's DNA in it, engaged in a different Elvis Presley kind of environment.
It's a little bit sad because one of them died on the toilet eating a massive peanut butter and jello sandwich, didn't he?
Yeah.
So that was the ultimate upshot. That is the most bizarre. We have to check the veracity of this, because if you can really do that, then I'm going to go and buy a lock of Mark Knopfler's hair and have some Mark Knopfler mice in my basement. Just all walking around with headbands and little strats. That's kind of what I'm going to do.
BBC Radio.
Yeah, so that was I think the general reaction for people outside. I mean, when it goes out of the context of design and art and science, basically those are the first basic reaction. I mean, oh yeah, I would love to have a Marilyn Monroe dog, or we'll have, so that's basically the way people see it. And one, for me, the most, I think, important or significant thing was when I was doing this thing, there was basically all this issue is basically, at the beginning. And apparently, doing a forensic test is illegal. And one of the company that I mentioned in this Wired article, apparently, they chose this company. They actually, after a few months, after the project was published, they actually took off this service that they offered, realizing it's illegal. So for me, it was a really nice, I think, experiment with how you can, what you can achieve with just, with just a story that you make people sort of believe in, which could be true, but is definitely didn't go till the end. So yeah, I think that's the end. Now I'm still sort of dealing with synthetic biology from, I'm taking part of this research in the RCA called Studio Lab, and hopefully we'll have new work that this is just a sort of a strange illustration for it, I hope, in the next months. And that's it. Thank you.